All right, everybody. It is day 2. So yesterday's video was on how to feed your starter to get ready to bake the next day. It is about 8:30 in the morning, and I've got all my ingredients laid out for sandwich loaf. So I have my bread flour. I've already measured my water and milk. I've got my starter here, which I'll show you in a moment. I have honey, I have olive oil, and I have salt. So we are going to measure everything out. Let me first show you what our starter looks like after feeding it last night. So this is our little starter. This is what is would normally go back into the fridge if I wasn't baking again. In this case, I will be baking again probably and feeding it again tonight and making a new one of these, because I plan on making monkey bread out of my cinnamon roll recipe for Christmas. So if you look in here, you can see once again, it is stiff. It's not going to come out like it was yesterday. It is nice and fluffy in there, and it is stiff. So this I'm just going to leave on the counter until I feed it again tonight to get it ready for my next recipe. But this is the second one we fed yesterday. So this is the big jar, and this is why I said you want to put it in a big jar. This is nice and bubbly and active. You can see it moves around in there. You can see it probably rose to about this point here, and then it started to fall again. So this is where it was most active, and it fell. So this is ready to use. And once again, I said I'm not a big stickler about making sure everything's perfect with the rise and using it right when it's risen before it falls, kind of thing. So it makes beautiful bread for me this way. So let's go ahead and start measuring out our other ingredients. Like I said, I already measured the water and the milk in the measuring cup just because I don't want to turn my back and use the sink if I don't have to. But next, what I'm going to do is just basically take my kitchen scale, and I like to weigh my ingredients separately wherever possible, just so I don't mess up the recipe. So right here is my salt. I just need 16 grams of this, and I have my scale out, so that's 16 right there. But ultimately we want to combine all these ingredients into our bowl. And in addition to a bowl, I've got my handy dandy spatula and chopstick again. I have a bowl scraper. If you don't, you probably could use another spatula instead. And I have something to mix my dough up with. Not necessary, at least to be this. It could be a spoon, it could be your hand. It doesn't really make a difference. And then I just have a measuring cup to scoop up my flour. I usually pour it in, but I don't know if it'll mess up with my mic being on today. But let's go ahead and measure our bread flour into the bowl. So we're going to make sure it's set at 0. And I prefer King Arthur flour. It's just I can buy it in bulk at BJ's. And then it's just, I find it's good flour. I use it for my all-purpose as well. So we need 800 grams, and again, usually I pour this right in, but I don't want to pick up the bag and do that, so I'm just going to scoop it until I get to 800. And again, this is a double recipe I'm making. It's 767. See, I'm at 815 now, so I overdid that. So because I have no other ingredients here, I can take some out until I get to 800. Okay, so I'm just going to put this over to the side. So we've got the bread flour. I'm just going to add the salt that we just measured out to that. And I'm just going to mix that around with my hand because that's that. And then we need, so this is where you can do it however this works for you. So this starter that we fed yesterday is exactly the amount of starter we need for our recipe. So that's why I do things differently. A lot of people who just keep big batches of starter can bake right away because they have big batches of starter on hand. I make exactly what I need for my recipe. So if I minus the weight of my jar and took it out, it's going to be about 200 grams in here. So there's no need to measure this again. We made this ahead for exactly what we needed. Usually what I do is pour some of my liquid mixture in and just kind of stir it around. And that way it'll just release from the jar a little easier and it'll be mixed up a little easier. You could pour this right into there if you wanted to, but the reason I'm not going to is because I'm going to measure my olive oil and my honey right into that as well. And if you try to pour that in after, it's going to kind of stick to the bottom, so I kind of leave half and half. So once I get everything else measured out, we're going to pour that right into the flour mixture. But for now, I'm just going to scrape down this. All right. Put that aside. We are going to put measuring on here, make sure it's back at 0. And I need 40 grams of olive oil. And right now I'm just using a regular olive oil, not an extra virgin. That needs to be washed now. And you're going to pour slowly because it'll come out faster than you think and you could overdo it really quickly. So you could measure this separately, like I mentioned before with everything else. But I've done this enough where I don't feel like I need to do that. Sometimes I overdo it with the honey because that is sometimes harder to control. And there again, if your measurements aren't 100% perfect, it's okay. It'll still turn out just fine. So that's 40 grams. I'm going to put that back on. We're going to zero this back out and we are going to put our honey in here as well. So I'm going to wipe my chopstick off and just do this very slowly if you're going to mix them all together because 40 grams will come out like nothing. So right now I'm at 30. Need just a little bit more. Alright, I'm going to scrape my chopstick down. If I get it off the paper towel. Okay. I'm still only at 33, 34, so I can pour just a little bit more in. And adding the olive oil and the honey makes this a much softer loaf than a traditional loaf of sourdough. So I can still use a little bit more in here. And we get local honey from our co-op. That's the cheapest place I can find local honey around here. Okay. All right. That is perfect. Let's just get this. All right. So we are good with that. That is exactly 40 grams. So now we have everything measured out. We can put the scale to the side. And now all we're going to do is combine all our wet ingredients into the dry ingredients. I'm actually going to do this one first with our starter in it. just going to pour that all in, and you want to scrape as much off the sides as you can get. And that's why yesterday I said if you want to make a few extra grams of this, you're never going to get every little thing off. So if you make, like this calls for 200 grams, if I added a couple more grams to make like 204, then that would be fine. But we're just going to do it this way. So that's pretty much as good as we're getting. The liquid from it helped kind of loosen all the started from the side. It still is a little chunky in there, but that is fine because we are going to need that all together. And now I'm just kind of give this a little stir, the olive oil, milk, and water and honey, because the honey has fallen to the bottom. So I'm just kind of loosen that up before I pour it in. And then we're going to do that. And just try to get as much, again, off the bottom of the bowl as possible. And we're going to scrape the honey off. Right. And now all we're going to do is slowly mix this up, because you want to incorporate all the flour, but you don't want anything to fly out. And this is super, super simple. Most of this is a little bit of prep right now, just mixing all the ingredients together. But really a lot of this is just a waiting game. And even with all the other breads. And the thing I like about this is you're supposed to do what's called a stretch and fold. See, that's exactly what you don't want to do. Is I just flipped all the flour out. I'm just going to use my bench scraper, scrape it off my countertop, and put it back in my bowl. And that's the great thing about these. You can buy the metal ones at Dollar Tree for $1.25. This one they're again got while thrifting. I'm sure you can find them cheap on Amazon. That's a plastic one and has rounded edges, and so it scrapes the sides of the bowl nicely, whereas the metal ones are flat and will scrape off your counter a lot easier. But what I was saying with this is before is usually with traditional dough you do what's called a stretch and fold or a coil fold, and that helps strengthen your dough. And I find that this dough, while I usually do one coil fold, is actually not even necessary, because you're going to need this enough where you're developing enough gluten up front where I feel like it doesn't need any other help during the rest of the process. So it is still got flour on the bottom. And make sure your countertops are clean too, because we're going to dump this out on the countertop in just a minute anyway to get everything else worked in together. And I'm sorry you can't see it a little better because I don't have my camera pointed down. So I'll do my best to kind of explain and show you what's going on. I'm just scraping my spatula up. Trying to get that all off. So right now you can see it's shaggy, it's not together. If we look on the bottom, there's probably still bits of flour. What I'm going to do is just dump it all out on. You can still see there's stuff stuck to the bottom of the bowl. So I'm just going to scrape as much of that as I can off to get the bowl clean as possible. And the reason you want to do that is because we're going to actually reuse this bowl as soon as everything's kneaded and together. And you don't want like chunky, crusty stuff going back in and sticking to your dough. So you can obviously use a clean bowl, a cleanest bowl if you really want to, but that's good enough for me. And all we're going to do is kind of gather all the stuff together and just kind of start kneading till it comes together. And all I'm just doing is pushing the dough together. I guess you can see me on the camera doing this, which is nice. And you just want to keep all the scrappy pieces down here, which you probably can't see because of the camera angle. But all I'm doing is kind of kneading it into those scrappy pieces. And you can scrape again your counter, get all that together. Let me move this out of the way and I'll show you. So things like that are still kind of on my countertop. That's what I'm trying to do, is pick that up. And I want to knead this until it's kind of all comes together and forms a nice smooth ball. So it's about 8:47 right now. Let's see how long this kind of takes to come together. It might be a few minutes. And there's no need to be too hard on your kneading process. You can be fairly gentle, but you don't need to treat it with kid gloves or anything. But what I plan to do with this today is make 2 different loaves. So I'm going to make a plain loaf. And in the fridge I have a piece of leftover bacon. And I'm going to make a bacon and cheese loaf. So I'll show you how to do those later. So once we're done kneading this out, and this comes together, which comes together actually fairly quick, we're going to cover it. And usually I put it back in my bowl. I use like shower caps and then put a towel over it. And I'll throw it in my oven. Make sure your oven is not on. And I throw it in there with the light on, and I'll set the timer for an hour. And I'll come back and check on it to see if it needs a coil. I like coil folds opposed to stretch and folds, and I'll show you what that is. I don't know if I'll show you in this video because I don't think it'll need it. When I make a regular loaf, I'll show you what it is, but I prefer what is called a coil fold over a stretch and fold. So that's what I use, and it just helps during the resting period to help form your gluten more. But because we're actually kneading this loaf, it shouldn't need to be formed, or it shouldn't need to have those things done to it. And then the other equipment that I haven't shown you that you will need later are some metal bread tins. So just a standard size. I recommend using metal and not glass, because from what I've read and seen others do, I haven't used glass, but the glass does not bake breads properly. So I would advise staying against that. I don't know if you've baked with glass before and you've been successful, let me know. I'm just kind of saying what I've heard. And if you're a beginner, I want to help you to set you up for success instead of kind of trying to use something that might not give you great results. So it is 8:50, so I needed this for about 2 or 3 minutes. You can see it's not perfectly smooth or anything, but it's holding together really nicely on its own. So I'm going to put this in the bowl. I'm going to, like I said, cover it up. If you don't have a shower cap, you can absolutely use plastic wrap over your bowl or something similar. I don't know if you want to just use a towel, because you don't necessarily want this to dry out. So plastic wrap should work, but I'm going to throw it in my oven with the light on because it keeps it warmer in there than it does in the house here. The house can get a little drafty. But then I will come back to you guys in the next hour, and we will check to see if it looks any different, which it really shouldn't look any different in the next hour. Right, y'all. So my timer just went off. It's been an hour since the bread has been in an oven that is not turned on, but the light is on, keeping it warm. I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to show you what it looks like. All right. So right now, you can see it doesn't actually look much different than it did when it went in. I will show you how to do a coil fold, but it is kind of thick that I don't even really think it needs it. And this isn't a true coil fold because it is such a thick dough. What I'm going to do is kind of stretch it and fold it under itself, and then I'm going to do it on the other side and do it again, and just kind of, I'll roll it up, put it back in. And I honestly don't think it even needed that, and if I didn't show you now, I probably wouldn't have done it at all. You can do one more fold if you need to in another hour, but because that is so strong as it is, I'm just going to put it back in the oven with the light on for a couple more hours, check it again. We're looking for it to become not necessarily doubled in size. This is a thicker dough. We're looking at just to have grown a little bit to be a little more airy. And then what we'll do once that is done, you're going to need, like I said, 2 metal bread pans. You're going to either need to grease them or spray them. I don't use spray in this house. And so what I tend to do is keep my butter packets after we take them out, and I'll rub the butter packet in here. If I don't have a butter, not packet, but like the wrapper. If I don't have a wrapper, I'll just butter my pan itself. And then so the next time I join on, we'll take a look at the dough when it's ready to go. I have some errands to go out and run, so I won't be here in the next hour to check in on this anyway. And that's the beauty of this recipe, is you can really leave this probably alone for several hours, probably half a day, even maybe into early evening if needed. This dough doesn't need to be babysat. So I'm going to put this back in the oven. I'm going to wait a few hours. Right now it's almost 10 o'clock in the morning, so we will check on this again in a little while. Alrighty, so we've got a wider area right now of the countertop so you guys can watch what's happening. It is, let's see, it is about 3 o'clock almost. So I just checked on my dough and got everything ready. Let me show you where we're at. So this has been in the oven. The oven has been off, but the light has been on. And you can see, if I take this out, look how beautifully that has risen in here. It is nice and kind of soft and stretchy. So we are going to get to this in just a moment. But first, I want to show you. So I told you I was going to make one regular loaf, and I'm going to make one cheddar and bacon loaf because I had a piece of bacon left over, and then we always have cheddar on hand. But what we're going to do first is, these are the 2 loaf pans I'm going to use. This is what we're going to shape and put our bread in while it sits in the refrigerator. So when it comes to baking day, what I normally do is I only have one larger pan. I find what happens if I use like two of the same size pans when you bake it. Usually I put one on as a lid, but if I use 2 of the same size pan, I find it kind of sticks and I don't like it. So I use one pan that's slightly bigger than my other pan. I put that on top as the lid. So what happens on baking day is we bake with this lid on first, and then we take the lid off halfway through, and then we bake the rest of the way so it can start to brown. So that's just kind of a sneak peek about what will happen in a few days. But first, we've got to basically butter up our pans. Like I said, I use the leftover butter wrappers. If you have any kind of spray oil, you can use that, or you can just really take butter and as long as it's kind of room temperature, you can spread it along your pan. So this will help so it doesn't stick when you go to bake it, and your loaf will come out nicely. So I just take the butter wrapper and I just spread it all over the four sides, the bottoms, make sure you get in the corners. So that is one buttered pan. And I'm going to do the second pan. You don't need to butter the lid because that's just basically there to trap the steam in when we bake. So that's just going to go back in my cupboard until we bake. And I said before, I like to let my dough sit in my fridge for about 2 days before I bake it. It is supposed to be better for your gut health the longer you let it basically sit and ferment in the fridge. So you could definitely bake this off tomorrow if you wanted to. So today is Friday. I could put this in my fridge and bake this tomorrow if I wanted to. And with the loaf I showed you yesterday, that's exactly what I did. I made them and I baked it off the next day. In this case, I'm going to bake these on Sunday morning instead. So that is been used, and I'm going to just pop that in the trash can. And so next we are going to work with the dough. The two things I have here is this is that metal bench scraper that I was talking about earlier. This I know I got from Dollar Tree for $1.25. They're very cheap. I'm sure you can get them off Amazon too. I'm also going to use my plastic bowl scraper, and this is what we're going to use first. If you don't have the metal one and you have something like this will work. Or if you have kind of a spatula, you can use that to scrape down your bowl too. So you don't necessarily have to have all the fancy tools, especially if you don't, like, you're not sure if you really want to do this long term, if you're just kind of experimenting. So like I said, if you don't have, like, I would recommend, let me start by saying I would recommend you bake in metal pans. I have not heard positive reviews from people who have baked in glass. It's just the way the heat conducts itself in there. So if you want to set yourself up for success, if all you have is glass, and go for it. But I don't want you to be disappointed if it doesn't turn out the same as others. This stuff is really cheap, whether you get it at Walmart or Amazon. And if you don't have a lid to put over it, you can always just take some tin foil and probably make a tent and cover it up. You don't want it covered tightly because you want it to be able to rise while it's in these pans. So you want to give it room to rise, but if you cover it up, it'll probably keep the air in just as easily. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my dough, and I want it to get on the counter. You don't have to flour your counter for this recipe. You don't have to put anything down. It's not going to be super sticky at all. So I'm just going to use my scraper to just go down the sides of the bowl, and this is going to help release it so I can dump it out on the countertop. So there's that. There's a little bit of extra in the bottom. I'm just going to scrape that off and put that on top. So there's our beautiful dough ball. This is going to make 2 loaves. So what I'm going to do is, you could definitely weigh this out and make 2 even loaves and weigh it all. But I just eyeball it. Again, no need to make things more complicated than they need to be. So there's that. We are going to make one plain, and we'll put this one over here, and we'll do the one with the cheddar and the bacon inclusions in just a little bit. But all you really want to do is gently, you worked hard to get it into a nice fluffy state. So all you're going to do is try to gently pull it into a rectangle shape. you kind of want to get it as wide as this pan here, and as long as you can kind of get it, making sure it is really, it's not thicker like in this corner and thinner somewhere else. So we're just trying to stretch it out till we get it to a uniform size. I put that extra one on there. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a little bit larger. You can see it's a little bit larger than my pan, but that is okay. And I realize you can't see the top of where my dough is, so I might do this a little backwards. Usually I start from the top there, and when I roll it, I work my way from the top down. But because you can't see that, I'm going to work from this edge up. So all I'm really going to do is kind of pull it gently, and we're just going to start rolling. And you kind of want to make sure the roll is a little tight, because you don't want a lot of bubbles in it, because you're going to have air bubbles in when it's when you bake it up. So let me kind of pull it back here so now you can see the end of it. So all I'm doing is really just rolling it up, and then you can see that there's that seam there. I'm just kind of gonna pinch that shut and everything. And you can also see this is longer than that is. And so I'm gonna stick it in here. I'm gonna stick the seam side down, and I'm just gonna kind of scrunch it together till it fits in there. So this is what it looks like. We're just gonna sit it in the middle there. What I forgot to do was grab, like I said, I just use plastic shower caps. These I do, there again, reuse these over and over until they kind of get dirty. But all I'm gonna do is put that over there. You don't want to really have it scrunched down in there. And this is what's gonna go in the fridge. I'm going to put in the back of the fridge, and like I said, this is going to sit there, and it's going to get baked on Sunday morning, and it's Friday afternoon now. So I'm not going to do anything with this until it is ready to bake. So we're done for this loaf for today, and we won't do anything tomorrow. It's just kind of an afterthought. So I'm just going to put it back here. I would recommend, if you want to bake this tomorrow, that you let this sit out for a few hours at room temperature to help it rise a little more. But if you're going to take 2 days to bake it, it's going to have plenty of time to rise and ferment in the fridge. It's just when things are colder, it's going to take longer. So because that's going to have 2 days to ferment, I'm not going to worry about leaving that out. So once I finish shaping the second loaf, I'm going to put them both in the fridge right away. So we're going to do something similar with this one, but because we're going to add extras to it, I'm actually going to do my rectangle the opposite way. So I'm going to go this way with it and try to make it like twice as wide as this pan, and I'll show you why. And to me, this is the best way to get your inclusions in kind of every little bite. And by inclusions, I mean, if you don't know what that means, it's just when you add extra ingredients to your bread. So the cheese and the bacon will be my inclusions for this bread. I've made, not a sandwich bread, but I made a lemon blueberry bread with my crusty loaf, and it was a disaster, let me tell you. I learned there that you never add wet ingredients early on. So I did the wet ingredients with my coil folds that time, and it made it a soupy, soppy mess when I should have waited right until the end to add those. And I should have drained my blueberries off a little more. They were too wet. So those are the kind of lessons you learn when you are making sourdough. You are not always going to be perfect. It is not always going to come out 100% great. If during the process it looks like you messed up, or you overproofed it, or it didn't rise right, I would still recommend baking it. For example, if you overproof it and it gets so bubbly and so wet that you can't really manage it, that's the perfect opportunity to turn a bread into a focaccia bread. It's basically, I'm not going to go into details, you can look how to do it, but you just basically pour the dough right into like like a pan. That could be a glass pan. I've used glass for that. Or you can just do like a metal baking pan that has more of a lip. And it's just like coated in olive oil. You dump the dough in there and then you cover it with more olive oil and you dimple it and do that kind of thing. And so if you overproof it, that's easy. If you underproof it and it's a little dense, you can always turn your bread into croutons, that kind of thing. So you can always find something to do if the bread doesn't turn out perfect. But so you can see here, I've made a rectangle this way that it's about just over 2 times the size of my pan. So all I'm going to do here is, I really don't have a rhyme or reason, but I just throw some of the cheese down here first. Move that out of the way. You don't want to put it all on this layer because we are going to do a second layer, but you want most of the cheese that you used to be on this layer. So I'm just going to kind of dot it around, make sure it's got good coverage. That's good enough. And then I'm going to do the same with the bacon. And since I only had 1 slice of bacon to use, I didn't have a whole lot of it. Like usually I like to use like 2 or 3 pieces of bacon. And we get our bacon directly from the slaughterhouse near where we live. So this bacon is like nothing else. This is nothing like you can get in a grocery store. I mean, you can't really get it much fresher than that. That's where we like to buy all our meats now, is directly from the slaughterhouse, our chicken and our beef and all that. But that is neither here nor there. So now we've got cheese and bacon spread out on this, and we're going to kind of fold it to the center like a book. So we've got that, and we're going to have that end meet here. So it is like that, and I'm just going to kind of pinch things together. Again, don't make it too complicated if you're adding anything to it. But now we're going to add more of the inclusions to the side. You kind of want to make sure there's not a whole lot of air pockets again, just because if there's air pockets, they'll be in there when they bake. So I pinched it down and didn't let the air out first. But again, not a huge deal. It is what it is. But let's go ahead and add the rest of our cheese in here. And the reason I don't add it on top or just kind of willy-nilly put it in is because when it bakes, you don't necessarily want it leaking out, but you want it nice and cheesy. And there are ratios out there that you can use for how much you put in your breads as far as bacon or cheese. Again, I'm not one of those people because it's too fussy for me. So we've got a little bit of bacon, a little bit of cheese on this end, and we're going to now roll it up just like before. So I'm going to do this from the top. And I'm just going to kind of press the air bubbles out as I go while I'm rolling. I can feel some of them down in there. But now all my bacon and all my cheese is enclosed. I can feel a gigantic air bubble right there. So I just kind of popped it with my fingernail to kind of get it out of there. You can see the seam, so we want to, there again, pinch the seam closed. You can pinch the edges closed if you want to. It's not necessary. But now you can see, again, this is a little longer than my pan. I'm going to make sure my seam side is down, and I'm just going to squish that in there too. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you can see it's in there. It's not touching the side. It's not filling it up. But as it starts to rise in the fridge or out on the counter, this is good. If you wanted to, you probably could even bake this if you let it go in the oven in a warm environment for another few hours. You probably could bake it same day and it would be okay. I'm just getting my other shower cap. But there's that. There's second loaf. And there again, we're not going to do anything else until we get ready to bake it. So that is literally the end of this video. I'll do my next video and I'll show you baking day, and then maybe I will make more like a crusty loaf later this week, and we'll do a video on how to mix and make that because the process is different and the ingredients are different with that one. But that's all it is. So it's sourdough is more of a waiting game than anything. It doesn't have to be complicated though. So these loaves will be ready again to bake, and we will do a third video in our series showing you how that works. But thanks again for joining me today, and I will join you again in 2 days and show you how these turned out. Thanks for watching, guys.